evening's Audit Committee, and I'm asking, are there any apologies for absence, please? No, we've no apologies for absence. Regarding the record of the previous meeting, can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 29th of November as correct, please? Agreed, thank you. I haven't received any urgent matters this evening. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests for this meeting? No. I do have one announcement that I'd like to make at this stage. I'd like to thank Jonathan Lloyd for his service to this committee and to Medway Council in his role. I believe this is his last meeting of the Audit Committee, so I'd like to formally thank him on behalf of the committee and wish him well with whatever he decides to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Now, if I may, I will ask Phil Watts to introduce the Risk Strategy Annual Review, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the annual review of the risk strategy. It's for Cabinet to approve the strategy. However, this committee is invited to submit comments to Cabinet for consideration. Members may recall that we've made some more fundamental changes to the strategy over the past couple of years, so this review is fairly light touch. Following consultation with officers and CMT, the main changes reflected for the 24-25 strategy are detailed in Appendix 1. These are primarily changes, additions really, in the roles and responsibilities section of Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the newly reconstituted Security and Information Governance Group. There's some amendment to the roles and responsibilities of portfolio holders, Cabinet, Audit Committee and the Leader of Council to reflect their responsibilities and more closely align them with the Constitution. And there are a few other fairly minor changes, but these are shown in red font. As I say, the committee is asked to consider the strategy, Appendix 1, and submit any comments for consideration by Cabinet.
Thank you, Phil. May I ask if there are any questions or comments for it? Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
I just wondered if it would be a good idea for this committee to receive the strategic risk management reports on a quarterly basis.
May I ask you to comment on that?
So in terms of the Constitution, it's for Audit Committee to ensure that there is a process and a strategy in place for management of risk, but the actual consideration of the risk register and management of risk on a sort of day-to-day basis is a matter for the Executive and for Cabinet.
Well, does it not include the new responsibility about the control environment? Would that not include that? Because the wording does include the control environment, which would be how well it's working. As I understand it, maybe I'm wrong in that.
So if this committee felt that the strategy and the approach in place wasn't effectively managing risk, then I think that could be flagged up by the committee. But in terms of actually quarterly monitoring of the risk register, that is a matter for Cabinet, and that's embedded in the Constitution. So I think it would need changes agreed by Council if we were going to change that. Is that right, Steve?
Okay, thanks. Councillor Goulven. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just reflecting on the last comments, I mean, also it does go to the individual scrutiny committees as well, doesn't it?
Does,
so,
yeah.
So it is getting a good layer. I think the changes all seem very sensible. To me, as Phil said, they're not huge. The only thing I would like to suggest that the Security and Information Governance Group, which from the way you said it feels come back, so I can't remember when we did, when it disappeared, but might make it just a little bit clearer if we had some indication of who will be making up that group? Because at the moment it says what they're going to do, but it doesn't actually give the roles of the officers who are actually going to be involved. I think that would be useful information to have. Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the SIG group has been reconstituted. Now, in its previous incarnation, the membership wasn't senior enough for it to have any teeth, quite honestly, and as a consequence, it wasn't achieving the objectives, and is disbanded. But the new monitoring officer, obviously, Bipinder's been in post for a couple of years now, and he wanted it reconstituted, but he wanted it pitched at the right level, so it is essentially AD level.
If that could be made clear in the text, I think that, because that would make the document carry more weight. Thanks, Phil.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the strategy itself, I do struggle with the Council's sort of likelihood of event in the fact that they roll two things into one, because you have the likelihood of an event happening and the likelihood of you actually detecting that happening. For example, if you take IT, the likelihood that someone tries to infiltrate the IT system is probably quite high. It might happen once a week, once a day, who knows, several times a day. But because we've got defences in place, it actually doesn't get through. So is there any way that we can differentiate between the likelihood of an event happening that we can all relate to and the likelihood of it getting through? So I liken that to sort of occurrence and detection. Basically, it's likely to occur, but we're likely to detect it. And we can't do anything about the occurrence because in that instance, that's out of our control, but we can do things about the detection. And there's some things that we might not detect that don't occur very often. So, you know, how can we differentiate? Because I do think they're two separate things. Some things are in our control and some things are not in our control. And so we sort of rate that into one and give it a likelihood, or it's only a 3, a level 3, because we detect it well, but we're not actually differentiating between what's likely to happen and how we're likely to detect it. And I think that that's something that we're missing somewhere when we're looking at risks.
That's quite a difficult question to answer, but I suppose if we take the example that you've referred to, cyber risk there, we measure risk in terms of likelihood and impact. And if something got through, if that risk manifested, the impact, it could be catastrophic depending on what it is. I suppose you're asking us to differentiate between the likelihood of something happening and the likelihood of us detecting that something's happening. In the situation you've just articulated there, cyber security, we know how many times our systems have been attacked because we've got monitoring systems in place that not just mitigate and stop the attacks from getting through, but it also monitors how many are taking place. So I couldn't tell you now, but Keith will be able to tell you how many times our systems are attacked every year. And I guess that's part of the mitigation, isn't it? That detection system is part of the mitigation, and that's. I don't think we would necessarily put a score around our likelihood of detecting it, but that mitigation in place to detect a risk manifesting is part of our scoring. That's what we take into account in scoring the risk. Yeah.
The only thing I think, if you differentiate between the two, you can actually, are we over-controlling something that never happens? For example, if we only got, you know, one every 5 years that attacked our system, and we've spent, you know, £1 million a year on super duper software to make sure it never happens, we're over controlling it. So that's why I think it needs to be separated, so we can understand likelihood of it actually happening, which in cyber security is probably quite high, you know, and the likelihood of us detecting it, so we can actually find out whether we're over controlling something as well, because otherwise, you know, you could be Keith could be saying, I need this software to do this, and we actually don't know. It just separates the two, which I think are separate personally.
Councillor Hackwell, are you asking us to change the way that risk management is managed, or are you asking us to change the scoring on risk management? Because as far as I know, risk management is standard across organisations, and we're employing a standard on this.
I'm not so sure it is standard. Where I worked, it certainly was. It was split into two different things. We had the severity of the thing, like the catastrophic thing if it got through. We had the occurrence. We had the detection, and we actually multiplied those together to come up with a number, for example.
But was that in your strategy, or was that in your practice?
It was in the strategy and practice.
Okay, perhaps we should ask maybe for the risk management people to have a look at if there should be any changes to the scoring on it.
Yeah, so I think I'm struggling to see how that would work for all the risks that are in our register. But as a committee, you can make that comment to Cabinet when it's considering the strategy. And in the meantime, I'll try and work with my officers to understand what that might look like, if that helps, yeah.
Perhaps Councillor Hackwell could supply us with an example of it.
Standard practice is a well-practiced method of assessing risks.
Okay. This organisation's existed for a long time using this one, so what I'm struggling with is to why are we changing what you felt was reasonable in the past?
It's because it's hard to separate in our system what is actually the likelihood of something happening and the likelihood of us detecting it. And I think that those are two separate events.
So I'm just for clarity, are we saying that what we've been doing in the past hasn't been accurate, or are we saying we're looking for better accuracy?
I'm always looking to improve stuff.
Of course, but that means that what we did in the past is wrong.
That doesn't mean it was wrong. It means it could be improved.
All right, we won't argue semantics. Thanks. Councillor Nestor, please.
Yeah, I just want to come quickly on this subject. How exactly do we identify risk? What techniques do we use to identify what's risk and how much risk it is and how much is not?
Bill, can you do that?
My view is that risk management is fairly subjective. The scoring even is fairly subjective. But what that scoring allows you to do as an organisation is prioritise risk. That's really what it's doing. It's allowing you to say the likelihood of this risk happening is more likely than another one, and the impact is more higher or lower than another. It just helps you to identify and prioritise the risks that, as an organisation, you need to be focused on mitigating most. It is a fairly subjective science, I would say.
And I'm just curious, does the team keep with current events, like if there is financial fluctuation or some cyber security threat that we know it's out there? I mean, do they keep with current news? Because that could be helpful to identify the risk as well.
So we're relying on professional expertise of officers and their judgment to identify what risks are and to put forward whether they think they're highly likely or not, or what the impact would be on the organisation if they manifested. But that's how we do it. Again, it's a difficult question to answer in a kind of hypothetical way, but risk by risk, the way you identify it and quantify it might be different.
Sorry, Councillor Bowen.
Hi, yeah, I was looking at the risk matrix and the B2 ones. As I understand it, the ones that are shaded grey get escalated, but the B2 don't. I just wondered, that looks quite sort of scary to me because they're still major impact and likely to happen. Just wondered if you could explain, if I'm right, if they get escalated, if they're coloured grey and sort of how risky it is that the B2 risks, saying risk too many times, don't get escalated. Thanks.
When we talk about escalation of risks, yeah, I suppose what you need to recognise is that when a risk is being assessed at a divisional level, say, that might, to that division, be considered high impact. But to the organisation as a whole, it wouldn't necessarily be. So we have to, for a risk to be escalated from team or divisional level to departmental level to corporate strategic risk register, we need a kind of cut-off, a fairly objective cut-off, and that scoring is so it might be a B1 at divisional level, but is it B1 at a kind of corporate level? Yeah.
Sorry, are there any more questions, comments? Can I move to the Vice Chair then, please, and to note that we're going to recommend to Cabinet that we have a look at some more granulation within the way we calculate the risks. Is the committee happy with that? Thank you.
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 13 that the committee is asked to consider the 2024-25 risk strategy as set out in Appendix A to the report, and we would request more granularity in how risks are calculated? Yeah.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. I now move to item 6, the Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25, and I'll ask Jonathan Lloyd to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual Treasury Management Strategy covering 2024-25 and beyond. Just point out to you that the figures in this report are based on our understanding of the capital programme, and including the timing of the projects and the funding thereof, as implied by the Round 2 capital monitoring report. So any reprofiling or reduction in borrowing that takes place subsequently would result in savings in both interest payable and MRP, minimum revenue provision. Or, to put it another way, things can only get better. But then I think that's actually a slogan that was actually used by one of the political parties prior to a general election, which I think they subsequently lost. So perhaps we move on from that. The council continues to operate within the CFR, the capital financing requirement. But as I've said on previous occasions, this just proves that we're not borrowing for revenue. Operating within the CFR does not of itself mean that the borrowing is affordable. And the nearest we get to an indication of what is affordable is actually in the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream, which you'll see in Appendix 3, which is on page 72 of the agenda or page 22 of the Treasury Management Strategy, depending on which numbering system you're looking at. And that shows that borrowing for general fund schemes is estimated to be about 4.61% of the net revenue stream, that net revenue stream being the £412 million shown in the draft budget summary report, which was presented to Cabinet in November 2023. However, just because the ratios appear to be modest doesn't mean that we've necessarily got the money, and that is part of the wider consideration of the council budget as a whole. SIPFA introduced the liability benchmarking scheme, which was included in last year's report as well. That's on page 58 of the pack and appears at paragraph 4.2.2. What this graph basically shows is that we are not borrowing for longer than we need to. And it's that great big white gap in the middle, the fact that the actual borrowing, all those heavy shaded bits at the bottom of the graph, are below the top line graph, which is the CFR and the underlying need to borrow. And that shows that, as I say, basically it means that we're not taking out loans for longer than we expect to actually have the debt. The debt maturity profile itself is shown at paragraph 4.3.5, with the peaks in the next couple of years, reflecting a desire that we do not want to be locked into relatively high interest rates for a long period of time when both significant receipts capital receipts are expected, and also we're expecting the interest rates to start falling. At paragraph 4.6 onwards, you'll see the operational boundary and authorised limits. And these are just technical limits to the borrowing. I'll just point out that included in the appendix is the MRP policy, and the fully updated Treasury management practices are also included at the end of the agenda. And there have been no significant changes to either. And that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. So happy to take any questions.
Councillor Nesterov, please.
May I request that the Treasury Management Network, the self-assessment by member responsible for scrutiny and Treasury management document to be sent to all scrutiny chairs, and a covering note explaining that it is intended to assist members with possible training needs. Basically, I want chairs to have more information.
I believe that's for the under the training section. Yeah.
Yes, training is certainly managed. Certainly included within the report. I don't think we've done a terrible amount of training recently. We did have Link down to present to you a couple of months ago, but we can certainly look at beefing that up.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'd like to say that it was very, very useful to have Link give us that presentation. It helps us, if nothing else, explain some of the jargon, so some of us forget, and new members on the committees. I think it's important. And I thank you for that question. Thank you. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for the report. So I've got several things. First of all, the sort of capital programme for 26-27, I guess we can just ignore that because it's only £6,000. So, you know, we've not looked far enough forward, I guess, in our thinking of what we want to do. So I'm going to ignore that. So we seem to be increasing our capital spend sort of like by 30% over the next couple of years. And those are projects that are already in the bag. Is it likely to stay just at that 30%, or is there likely to get some movement? That's sort of one question. In the table on page, I think it's page 57, on table 415, we seem to be borrowing a lot more in lieu of business rates. You know, the 23-24 this year is like 5.5 million. It jumps to 28 and then 35. What do we know that we're going to get a lot more business business rates in the next couple of years to justify that extra borrowing? That, you know, because I don't see that, you know, lots of businesses rushing to Medway to increase our business rates. So I'd like that. It may be just my misunderstanding of what that is, but you know, we're borrowing a lot more on business rates than, in the next 2 years than we have in this year, certainly. If we pop onto page 59, and we look at what we're doing, a couple of things. The in-house managed stuff, is that primarily MDC, the total managed in-house investments? Because it's like 70 million, or going up to 90 million. Is that what it is? Or what else is it? And why have we got such a marked increase in banked, where we were sort of like having very, you know, small amounts? Sort of March 23, there was 16,000, and now we're up to sort of 19 million. It's a marked increase, and I just wanted to understand that. And then more of a sort of reflective question. You know, we've got to refinance 170 million in the next couple of years because they're coming to be refinanced. And although, you know, you've got a strategy of you don't want a short-term, you'd rather have long-term loans rather than short-term loans, I guess that's everybody's strategy in the country. That will be trying to borrow short-term because they're expecting the interest rate to go down, and who wants to get stuck with a 5% interest rate now, for 25 years, when you borrow at 5 now and then 2 years later borrow at 3. So is it going to be, and you know, we keep hearing the rhetoric, and I think we were told at the last audit committee that, you know, you're troubling refinancing loans because everybody thinks we're broke. Because someone keeps telling us the council is broke, and it's difficult to refinance when you're getting a bad reputation. So is it going to be difficult to refinance those in the short term because everybody will be looking for short term loans? Now, I'm going to just jump a couple of things to the policy. It says on page 123 that members are charged with governance also have a personal responsibility to ensure that they have appropriate skills and training for the role. So could you expand on exactly what, you know, if that's written in the policy, what exactly is expected of us as it's our personal responsibility? So I'd like to know what I'm personally meant to be able to go away and do. So I'd like that. And the only other thing is, on page 125, you talk about link asset services, and the contract run from March 2017 for 2 years, and it was extended to the 28th of February 23, which is next month. So last year, sorry, 28th February last year, with the option to extend for a further year, which I'd imagine that's coming to an end next month. What is our strategy? Have we signed a new contract for link asset management? And if so, does that mean that the policy needs to be updated with the current state of affairs? Because otherwise we're having a policy that is actually going to be inaccurate next month. Sorry for the long questions, but at least did read the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Hackwell. And perhaps you'll prompt me as I go through these, because I've tried to scribble these down, so if I get anything wrong or miss something out, do prompt me. First thing you asked about was, I think, the size of the capital programme, yes? Well, that is a question for members and for consideration, and obviously next month you'll be setting both the capital and the revenue budget for the council as a whole, and it's up to members if they want to modify the capital programme. I only take the figures as they're given to me. You also asked about the number of projects that we've got, or the amount of borrowing that we're doing that's in lieu of business rates. Now, I'm sure Phil will probably have something to say about this, but the reason we put it like that is that's just really our justification for having done the capital projects in the first place. We're doing this because we expect that in future we'll actually generate an increase in business rates, which actually makes the project worth doing. You then asked about our in-house investments, Well, in paragraph 4.3.2, the table there, the in-house investments just consists of, yes, the Medway Council subsidiaries, which are indeed the majority of it. Like, as at 15th of December 2023, that was 74 million, as opposed to the just under 20 million that we'd got with banks. And the reason that it's 20 million now, and it was only 16,000 last year, that's just really an accident of, sorry, accident is the wrong word. It's just a snapshot, and at that particular time, on that particular day, that's how much we had at the very end of the year. I always try to keep there's no point in having lots of money in the bank when we are net borrowers. So the aim is to try and keep cash balances low, but high enough that we don't actually run out on a day-to-day basis. And keep the borrowing as low as we can, because obviously we pay more in interest, at a high rate of interest to borrow the money than we can possibly get by investing it in depositing it with banks or putting it in a money market fund. So that's the reason that we do that, and it is just happens to be a snapshot that you're looking there. You asked about our ability to refinance and pointed out that we do have a lot. I think what has happened lately is, just generally speaking, the local authority market has more or less dried up. There's not a lot of, there used to be a lot of borrowing between authorities. That, to an extent, has dried up. There is no problem with us refinancing, because we can borrow from the Public Works Loan Board, which is effectively a branch of the Treasury, and there's no issue with doing that. In the past, it has been advantageous to use local authorities because you got it slightly cheaper than the PWLB. Lately, though, and this isn't just because it's us and because we're not in the best of financial health, other local authorities have actually been asking for, in a lot of cases, higher rates than were obtainable from the PWLB. Some authorities are going for that because they only want it for a couple of months rather than having to go to the trouble of having a longer-term loan from the PWLB. But no, we haven't really got any real issue with that on the refinancing. I think your next question was about training for members and what the responsibilities were. I don't know whether Phil can come in on this, but as I understand it, I mean, your responsibilities are to understand what you're being presented with and understand the implications of what you're being asked to approve, really. In terms of the link contract, there are only actually two firms in the market for providing Treasury advice. There's Link and there's Arling Close. And basically there's not a lot to choose between the two of them. Last time we looked properly at considering whether to stay with Link or whether to go with Arling Close. I spoke to other Treasury officers in other authorities, and it seemed to be that those that with Link were perfectly happy with Link, and those that were with Arling Close were perfectly happy with Arling Close.
My point, Jonathan, is in the document of January 2024 that the contract run out in 2023 and may be extended for a year. It's not a live document. Maybe we've extended it to 2028, I don't know, but it should be in the document to say what happened.
Yeah, I do apologise, Councillor. I think that is an oversight on my part. In a 126-page report, I'm afraid I do feel sorry for members who have to read this, but I find myself sort of the matchstick starting to break on the eyelids as you're going through it. So I apologise if I've missed that out. Yeah, we will do.
Councillor Nesterov, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few more questions as well. So, just wanted to ask, how does the council plan to have enough cash on hand for our immediate needs and at the same time have more investments? Yeah, a few questions, sorry. On page 62, section 409, one sec. So basically we have a couple ones maturing in the next 2 years, which are larger loans. And we also have the graph saying the rates, the interest rates, the projected interest rates for the next 2 years. Basically, have we adjusted our strategy to be able to get the best rates at the best time possible? That's my question. The next question is, as Councillor Hackwell suggested, that the council doesn't have very good reputation, which could affect the percentage of the loans that we are getting and the interest rates. I noticed in the report, I can't remember on which page it is, that recently, I think it was 2020, some credit agency, worldwide credit agencies, downgraded UK credit to AA minus. Isn't that going to have more effect? Does that have, I'm a new councillor, so I want to know, does that have more effect on our credit and the credits the council is getting, or is it the bad reputation that could have more effect on that? And that's it, yeah, thank you.
Apologies, Councillor, could you just repeat your first question? Because I can't read my own writing.
Basically, how does the council plan to have enough cash for day-to-day needs and at the same time invest?
Yeah, well, basically, as far as covering our day-to-day needs, what I try to do is try and keep our cash balances round about the £10 million mark. Obviously, that fluctuates quite a bit because you can't do it, you know, day-to-day, we pay this. But I try to make sure that we don't run too far below the 10 million. In the past, I've allowed that to actually go down a lot below the 10 million. But given that we're now in the situation where we are relying more on the PJLB for our source of borrowing rather than other local authorities, if it was another local authority loan, I could ring one of the brokers and I could get the loan within a day. With the PJLB, you've got to give them 5 days notice. So you've got to be a bit more savvy in making sure that you don't think you're going to get very much below that £10 million mark, that, you know, if you suddenly had an invoice to pay that one of the departments hadn't actually told you was coming along, you would be able to actually meet those payments. So that's how we do that. You asked something about page 62?
Yeah.
Which,
It was
sorry.
the projection of the interest rates in the future.
Oh, yeah.
And how do we strategize to get the best rates?
Well, we do. This is where Link come in, and this is where they have been telling us for many years to try and keep it to keep things short. That was the best thing to do. I think in hindsight, because this is always the thing with advisors advise. Given that they kept on telling us that interest rates were not going to rise very far or very quickly, and therefore we should keep it short and not take out lots of long-term loans. I now wish that a couple of years ago perhaps we should have filled our boots and now we'd be quids in. But there you are. Anyway, they are predicting those rates to start falling, not by very much, but a modest easing, which is why they're telling us not to lock in for very long periods at the moment. Now, I'm trying to avoid taking out too much borrowing that's going to mature in 24-25, because we're already at the £100 million level. Now, this committee and the full council have indeed authorised that we can have up to £150 million outstanding in any rolling 12-month period. I would not like to push it too much higher than I've got. I like to have that wiggle room for if the unexpected happens. Yeah, that's why we do what we do. In terms of the interest rates that we're paying, the rates set by the PJLB are the same rates for any council in the country, and they are based on the yield on gilts for the particular maturity period that you're talking about. So they will actually fluctuate according to government borrowing as a whole, the rates that the government is having to pay to investors. In terms of the downgrading of the UK's credit rating, well, that will obviously have had an impact on the overall rates that the government is having to pay on gilts. So yes, it will affect us, but it will affect everybody else borrowing from that source accordingly. And have I answered everything that you said?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Bowen, thank you.
Hi, could you tell me what borrowing in lieu of future rent, capital receipts and future NHS grants relate to, please?
Thank you, Phil.
Okay, thank you. So they largely relate to specific schemes. So the question that Councillor Hackwell asked earlier about the business rates, borrowing in lieu of business rates, that is in relation to the Innovation Park Medway scheme. So the business case that underpinned that was about building, encouraging businesses to set up factories and units on that site. The infrastructure investment that we were going to fund on the Innovation Park Medway to be funded from the business rates in due course that it generated. Now that business case was agreed before the world was turned upside down in terms of COVID and war in Ukraine and all those other things. And factors have meant that business case needs to be reviewed. And so the current administration is looking at pausing that programme of work. So the estimates that are in there were taken at a point in time, but they will change while the new administration reviews the business case. Now, in terms of the other things, you talked about the borrowing in lieu of grant from the NHS. That's specifically related to the Healthy Living Centre in the Pentagon. So that it will be funded by the NHS, but it's done on a drawdown basis. So we build it, and then they'll fund the grant or the contribution. And the rents, is that primarily the MDC ones, or it might be some of the HRA as well, mightn't it? Yeah, there's two sets really. MDC's out of the programme, so it's probably primarily the HRA programme. But the HRA will borrow. But eventually that borrowing will be serviced from the rents that are generated. Debenhams as well is another one where the original business case was predicated on £17 million invested in Debenhams that would then be funded from the rents generated by that asset. So does that help? Oh well, yeah. There's not much of that anymore. I mean, what we tend to where there was some investment in play parks, for example. That was one that we did from capital receipts. But the availability of capital receipts is pretty limited at the moment. So we're trying to remove that from the programme and fund it from other sources. Yeah.
Councillor Goulven.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jonathan, for a very detailed and comprehensive report. I only spotted 2 typos in the whole thing, so I think that's absolutely brilliant. And they're terribly minor. There's, in section 4.3.6, there's a surplus "and" in the sentence, and on page 109, the Chief Finance Officer would refer to the Chief Finance Office. I'm not sure Katie would want to be referred to as an office. I think that's absolutely brilliant in such a long and comprehensive report. Going back to the Healthy Living Centre one, I noticed that as our colleague mentioned over there, that the borrowing in lieu of future owners grant has now slipped into 24-25 financial year. It's slipped into this present financial year. So we are at least 18 months behind with that project now. And that is beginning to concern me greatly, because that is going to put huge pressure on the council's finances, in that the loss-making first floor, some of that was offset by doing deals with charities who could then claim back 100% non-domestic rate relief. Well, those concerns have all now been cleared out. So the council is now responsible for the entire non-domestic rate. It's also responsible for this until that area is actually turned into a construction site, for the service charges. That must put a huge pressure. So could we have through the Vice Chairman, a little note to Cabinet that they please need to put some pressure on to get that project moving. 18 months is a long, long time for it to be behind. Also, I noticed that in the table, it's probably absolutely right because we haven't got to the stage, but we're going to have to find a shed load of money to pay for the rack problem in Gum Wharf. And how is that going to affect our capital programme? Just a couple of little things. In Appendix 6, it refers to an ESG policy. Could the members of the Audit Committee have a copy of that ESG policy, please? Because that will make some interesting reading. And my final little question is on page 88. I got a little bit confused, Jonathan, in section 1.7, which referring to credit default swap overlay. I thought we were not into dealing with any derivatives, or are we just using that as an indicator?
Phil?
If I may, Chair, so I'll deal with the first two. Jonathan can go back to our Treasury expert for the last two. But the first thing to say is that this isn't really the forum for talking about the capital programme individual schemes. You know, we're sort of going outside the remit of this committee. But what I will say is that both in terms of the Healthy Living Centre and the RAC, the impact of those changes to the capital programme will be reflected in the capital programme when it comes forward in February, and the impact of that on our Treasury will be reflected in the revenue forecasts when we bring that forward. And in terms of what that means for our Treasury performance, they are genuine capital schemes. So the RAC one, for example, whatever we end up investing in that, that will be a genuine capital scheme, and any additional borrowing will result in an increase to the CFR, so it doesn't change our under-borrowed position or anything like that, and it's well within our limits. So, first of all, it's probably not the right forum for that discussion anyway, but that's the answer if that's helpful. And I'll hand over to Jonathan for this.
Well, in terms of ESG, well, what do we actually mean by ESG? And this seems to be something that nobody seems to be able to actually agree on, which is why our ESG policy as it exists is probably the sentence that's put into that Treasury management practice. It is bear in mind that we have not got lots of money to invest, and therefore we do not invest as such. The only investments we've got are basically our day-to-day cash. So it's plus, of course, what we've lent to MDC also, and Kindy for that matter. But in order for us to actually police, if you like, the ESG, I mean, we'd have to look at, on that West lending to dodgy people that we wouldn't really want them to do. The property funds we've got are the oil companies that are tenants of some of the buildings. It would be very difficult for us to actually do. I think CITFA is still procrastinating over what ESG should actually mean in a local authority context, and so we'll be guided by whatever develops in that sphere. Sorry?
So is there an actual policy we can refer to? Because that's the impression I got from the report.
Not as such, but we're obliged to, within the Treasury management practices, to actually refer to what we're doing about ESG. And well, basically, it's not, to be honest, not a huge amount, because there's not very much we can actually do about it. We're not directly investing in anything dodgy, for want of a better way of putting it. Forgive my loose language in that. In terms of interest rate swaps and things like that, we're not into that. We're not into derivatives. Our affairs are very simple, albeit that the numbers are quite big, but it is all very basic stuff.
So, Jonathan, what does that paragraph actually refer to then? Because I'm scratching my head a little bit. Sorry.
Could you just direct me again to where that is?
At page 88.
Is that page 88 of the pack or page 88 of the report?
Of the agenda.
Page 88.
And it's para 1.7.
Hold on.
Okay. Yeah, what you said, Adrian, it's basically a proxy to for the kind of creditworthiness. That's basically what we're not involved in derivatives at all. But yeah, but it's what our advisors use as a proxy. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I can see what you're talking about now, Councillor Galvin. We get a report each morning from Link, who advises. They do a sort of aggregate looking at each of the credit rate for each of the institutions that we're dealing with. They show what the three rating agencies are scoring for those particular organisations, and they also look at a thing called credit default swaps, and this is basically what the market thinks the risk is of these institutions going. It is, if you like, the price of insuring against those institutions. And they aggregate all these and they come up with a colour coding for us. And basically what I do each morning is I look at what those colour ratings are, and those colour ratings determine whether they think that we are safe to deposit with an institution for a period of 3 months, 6 months, a year, or what have you. But given that all our investments are actually short term, as long as they've got a colour rating of any description, we're fine. Now, a few years ago, one of the banks that we dealt with had a little problem with their balance sheet, and technically speaking, they dropped out of they lost their colour. And what we had to do with that at that particular time, over the course of a couple of months, we were having to constantly disinvest with that bank, and in the end we stopped dealing with them for a few months until they sorted themselves out. But that's all that is referring to in terms of what we do as far as credit default swaps is concerned. It's just a methodology that Link used to tag on to come to an overall conclusion on the institutions that.
Were you referring to the Bank of Credit and Commerce? Was that the one? I think that's all those are the...
No, it was a well-known high street bank.
Any other questions on this report? May I call on the Vice Chair then, please?
I move, I move recommendation 1.1 at page 47 that the committee consider this report, note its contents and pass any comments on for consideration by the Cabinet and recommendation to full council for approval.
Is that agreed? Thank you. I now come on to item 7, and I'd like to ask James Larkin to introduce this report. Sorry for the delay, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report at Appendix 1 is the second update on progress for 2023-24, detailing the work of the audit team from the 1st of September to 30th of November 2023. Section 4 on page 131 of your pack shows how our resources have been used over the period and also details the impact on those projected resources. Full details of the last reviews from 22-23 that have been finalised since our last report to the committee and progress against the 23-24 plans can be found in the tables at section 5 starting on page 132. The tables starting on page 143 detail the other assurance and consultancy activity that has been undertaken during the period as well. An update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 6, which starts on page 145. We have, or had, made reasonable progress against the agreed plan with 40% delivered and a further 20% underway as of the 30th of November. It should be noted that those outturns are based upon the number of reviews we expected to undertake with the results projected to be available at the start of the year. As of today, I can confirm that the number of agreed assurance assignments delivered is still at 40%, but there is currently 33% underway. Section 7 on page 146 contains a request for amendment to the plans to remove one review and defer a second to 2024-25. The audits in question are no longer suitable to go ahead, and they will help to account for some of our lost resource. Finally, section 8 of the report provides an update in relation to all agreed actions in the table commencing on page 147. The second table starting on page 152 details actions outstanding more than 6 months after their agreed implementation date. Members will note that updates have been provided by the services detailing the progress with these actions and, where appropriate, have requested revisions to implementation dates. I'm happy to try and answer any questions members may have.
Thank you, James. Councillor Nestorov, please, and then Councillor Goulburn.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a few questions about this report as well. So you said on page 146, it states that some of the measures have taken more than 6 months. So what is the reason for these delays for implementing the recommendations? As well, on page 152, the children in need, section 17, this has been delayed for quite some time. And excuse me if this has been asked before, but as a new councillor, I wouldn't know. So it says because it's been delayed because sufficient training was not provided and the contract has been significantly delayed in providing this training. Is there a way to avoid that in the future by having more than one contractor on standby? So if one of the contractor is delaying, we can turn to someone else. As well, on page, one second. Just checking my notes here. On page 161 of the report, excuse me. No, that's my questions for now. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, individuals, the services themselves are responsible for implementation of the actions, which is why I've asked them for updates to try and provide to the committee. And that's the last column in that particular table where they've indicated what the reasons for the delays. In terms of the Section 17 financial assistance, yes, this has been ongoing for quite some time, and that's a conversation I've had with the service when they came forward to say it still wasn't done. In terms of the number of contractors, we have one contractor providing what we refer to as all pay cards. So they are the provider of that particular for the council. There's been difficulties having their availability for training. I don't think it's use of their credit cards, if you like. They're prepaid, but effectively it's that type of system. As they are the providers of it, they're the people we need to do the training, because the staff have got to use those with families. So it's got to be them providing the training. It's their product. I think things are now sorted. We've got some in-house training happening, so staff that already use it. I think we're taking the step of staff in adults, social care who have been using them for a bit longer. We'll provide some in-house training to officers in children's services so that we can start getting this moving forward, and then there can be a wider rollout as they move forward, which is why they've said they're hoping to, it's planned to be sorted out by the end of this month. Okay.
Councillor Goldman.
Thank you, Chair. Well, certainly on that last one, I agree with Councillor Nestorf. It's no reflection on your guys at all. I understand, James, but I'm just wondering, Chair, perhaps if we could put something, pressure from this audit committee on the service to make sure that training is done, because if it's not done by the end of this month, that'll be the fourth or fifth time that it's been.
Can I update the committee actually on my personal involvement on this one?
Yeah.
I spoke to the Director of Children's Services, and I have personal assurances from the Director and the Assistant Director in Children's Services People Services, that this will happen, and that they have done everything they can with the contractor, and as James has helpfully outlined, internally they are now going to have to do some cross-training of other officers. But I have personally spoken to the Director about this.
Thanks.
So I hope the committee is happy that we are all concerned around the same
Good,
thing.
yeah.
And James has been very helpful with his team and making sure that there is consistent follow-up.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to see you hands-on. I'm
Thanks.
delighted. James, I noticed in section 3.2 we talk for having an external review. It's now, 4 years since we've had that done. Are we thinking about inviting somebody else in to do an external review sometime? Or so it'd be interesting comments on that. And I noticed on the recently completed audit work, the day budget has been exceeded in practically every case. I know we're taking one out, the facilities management, but will that mean there will be a further knock-on effect of lower down in the programme, or do you think by just taking the facilities management out, that'll make up for those extra days? I presume it's because the work was so complicated it went over the original estimate, which is best to do a good job rather than a poor job. So I think it's the right way to do it.
Yeah, with regards to your question about a review of the counter-fraud services, obviously our own internal audit team can't do that because they can't be independent, because I manage both. I've been in discussions recently, in the last week actually, with the head of internal audit at Dartford and Sevenoaks Partnership. And we are planning that as part of the plan for 24-25, they will conduct a review of our counter-fraud service, and in return, we're going to look at their risk management framework, because that sits under their head of audit. So again, they're in the same position as we are. So it's some reciprocal work to alleviate those independence issues. So that's going to be on the plan for next year. In terms of day budgets being exceeded, with everything, this is very much like, I feel like Mystic Meg trying to predict the future. When we're setting the predictive resource budget for the year, obviously, I've got to present a plan to members in March, to commence from April. So I'm actually, for next year, I'm doing it now. I'm trying to predict what our resources are going to be for next year. Obviously, if there's any work overrunning at the end of this year that runs into next year, because I've got to put in an allowance of days for that to happen. But obviously, we've still got 2 months to run, so I'm trying to predict what we're going to have left, what we're not going to have left. So, and it's the same thing for the audits themselves. We're kind of predicting we'll use 15 days, but as you've rightly said, some of these can be quite complex. You'll run into things that require more work than you would have originally anticipated. We do keep bi-monthly, I know we refer to it as quarterly, but I actually do refresh those resource budgets on a bi-monthly basis. If there is to be any further change as a result of impacts, obviously we'll be bringing a third update report to the committee in March. By that point, I would hope to be in a much better position to know exactly where we stand. And if there does need to be any further impact, we'll obviously get agreement from the committee on that.
Thanks, James.
Any other questions for James? Sorry, Councillor Nesterov. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. So on page 152, I noticed at the bottom, the market income collection fee are reviewed annually, but in the past they were not made public. So I believe us as a public body, we should publish all fees and charges to ensure transparency in the community and also to prevent any doubt that there is something nefarious going on. So I'm really happy that from now on we're going to actually start publishing these fees. Also, it makes it easier for people to actually know how much they need to pay for market store as well.
Thank you. Obviously, that's one of the reasons we picked up on it during the audit. I think it was just an oversight last year that it didn't get into the fees and charges document, but it will be from this year onwards.
Thank you, James. Any other questions? I'd like to also thank James and the team for the amount of detail and support that they've been providing in these reports, but also in the amount of support that they're giving to the operational services to ensure that the recommendations are understood. Therefore, if they're understood, they're being implemented in a much better and healthier state. So I'd like, James, if you wouldn't mind just taking our thanks back to the team on that one, please.
Just to be clear.
We can do. We can do. Would you like them separate or you want them all together?
I'm just unclear. You were sort of wrapping up with James, and I thought we'd. Well, I don't know.
No, I wanted to thank him about this particular
Okay.
one.
Fine.
I'd prefer to take each item and separately, and then we'll agree them because that's the way they appear on the agenda. Thank you. May I call on the Vice Chair, please?
I move recommendation 1.1 to 1.3 at page 127 that the committee notes the outputs and performance against the internal audit plan for Medway for the period 1st of September to 30th of November 23 as detailed at Appendix A. The committee approves the revisions to the agreed internal audit plan for Q3 to Q4. The committee approves the revised implementation dates for actions detailed in Section 8 of the report attached to Appendix A.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Now I'd like to move to item 8, which is the counter fraud update for the 1st of September to the 30th of November 2023. And back to James for that one as well, please.
Thank you, Chair. As with the internal audit update, this is the Appendix 1 is the second update on progress against the 23-24 plan for the period 1st of September to 30th of November 2023. Section 3, commencing on page 158 of your pack, shows how resources have been used over the period, detailing the level of time spent on each of the key areas outlined in the plan. The tables in Section 4, commencing on page 160, provide an overview of the work undertaken in each of those areas. The table on page 161 shows the summary of results from external investigations and the associated savings. There's also a brief summary of other counter-fraud activity in the table on page 162, including details of any housing benefit overpayments or excess council tax reduction awards arising as a result of DWP investigations. An update against the team's key performance indicators for the reporting period is provided at section 5, and that's on page 163. You will note that only 12 investigations were concluded in the reporting period with associated cashable savings of 11,740, but as noted in the covering report, there have been savings of 378,646 for the year to the 30th of November. And that's in comparison to Medway's share of the counter-fraud costs of the service, which are approximately 248,990 for the year. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Any Councillor Nesterov? Councillor Hackwood, did you indicate? Did you yeah. So if I take Councillor Nesterov and you indicated then.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I have a question about the report. On page 161, we have a summary of results for external investigations. The sums doesn't seem to be that much that they recovered. How much are we paying for the external investigation for their work? And is their service financially justifiable given the relative low recovery amounts?
Okay, yeah, that's just those particular cases in this reporting period. As I mentioned, the total savings for work that we've carried out from 1st of April to 30th of November is 378,000 against the costs of the counter-fraud team. Medway's share of those costs is 248,990. So we're at the moment about 130,000 savings above what our costs are. So, as I say, in this particular reporting period, we can't control the outcomes of the cases, unfortunately. So they are lower than usual, I will admit, but we've had a much bigger focus on fraud prevention, fraud awareness training, things like that this year. So that's taken some of the officers' time away from these sorts of cases. The reason we need to really increase that fraud awareness is because we're not getting as many referrals from staff as we used to, and the quality of some of the things we get from the public is too vague for us to actually be able to take anything forward. So we want to increase that awareness amongst the rest of the organisation and indeed across a broader picture of the organisation, because a lot of the work we've done up to now, we've done a fair bit of work in housing, we've done some work with schools, we've done a lot of work in council tax. Areas like social care, which is a fraud risk, we don't get any referrals. So we need to raise that awareness amongst the staff to say it is a potential problem. If you spot something, come and talk to us. So that's kind of what we've been doing. But overall for the year, the savings are still over our actual costs.
Thank you. Just to come back, can we have a more detailed report, maybe at the end of the year for the full year, so we can see the scale and the picture?
Yeah, we'll be bringing an annual report, usually it was late this year, it wasn't until September. We'll usually bring that in June. I think it's going to be dependent on when the AGS is ready, because our annual reports usually sit alongside that.
Councillor Hackwell, you wanted to come in?
Thank you for your report, James. Thorough as normal. I'd just like to pick up on the single person's discount and the National Fraud Initiative, just to understand. You say in the report that you've received nearly 10,000 matches, which left something like 494 matches to work on, and then you got another 4,000 matches in November. And that trickled down to, as far as I can see, you looked at those in December, those 4,000 extra ones. But you've said you've got 37 matches currently, so 37 out of 967 is a small percentage, probably less than 1% that you end up working on. I also note in the draft budget, the draft budget is planning on getting an £800,000 reduction on single person discounts based on the fact that the Medway Council's running at 31.6%, and I think their peers are around 30%. So the 1.6 equates to 800,000, which is being baked into the budget. So first question is really, you know, you're running at less than 1%. I mean, is there really that scope in single person discounts? Are we that bad? I mean, from all the work that you do on the National Fraud Initiative, do you think that there is an £800,000 hole to be got back? Because I'm interested in that. And is 37 or 1% fairly typical from the matches of 10,000?
Okay, yeah. That 9,667 matches weren't just on council tax. Biannually, the council tax single person discount is matched to electoral roll. That happens annually. Biannually, there is a much bigger exercise where the Cabinet Office will take a greater volume of data sets from us. So that includes housing benefit, council tax reduction, housing data, so our tenancy data, waiting list data, right to buy information. Those matches in 22-23 are across a much broader range of areas. Obviously, council tax is within that. And we did receive, as I've mentioned, an additional just shy of 4,500 matches where they introduced HMRC data. We've just had the matches for this year, which is purely SPD to electoral roll. And I think we've got about 2,500 matches to look at. But some of those we would have already dealt with potentially as part of the reviews this year. That £800,000 income target or changes that you're referring to, what the actual revenues team have been doing some proactive work themselves, and they have embarked on a significant review of people receiving single person discount. They've actually done the data matching on credit referencing. So that will pick up a completely different set of people potentially to what the NFI does. That matches the SPD purely to electoral roll. What they're looking at is comparing it to credit referencing data to identify additional individuals. So they've been working with, they're not doing investigations as we would, they're issuing review, they're just carrying out reviews of SPD, the people with SPD. So they have issued, I think they've already removed something like 1,600 SPDs because they're working with an external company to do that. I don't know what the savings are, but I can't think what they are off the top of my head, but I know there's been a significant amount of work that's happened in the last quarter of last calendar year. So I couldn't say whether or not that target of 800 is achievable. I honestly don't know because I've not seen the data that they're working with, but I know they are carrying out a mass review, far bigger than we would have capacity to do.
Good.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, call on the Vice Chair, please. Thank you again, James.
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 155 that the committee is recommended to note the outputs and performance of the counter-fraud team for Medway for the period 1st of September to 30th of November 23 as detailed at Appendix A.
Is that agreed? Thank you very much. And now we're on to item 9, the Internal Audit and Counter-Fraud Strategy 2020 to 24, the review of progress for 23-24. Thank you very much. I'll call on James again.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the document at Appendix 1 outlines our progress against our agreed strategic objectives during the last year. Members will note there has been relatively good progress in all areas, and while we have not expanded the partnership to include other councils, we have expanded the counter-fraud elements of the service to allow us to undertake internal disciplinary and grievance investigations, which provides cost savings to the authority. Due to the fact we've been largely dealing with the Medpay review this year, we've not prepared a new strategy as yet for the period from April 2024. Coupled with this, the new global internal audit standards, which were released yesterday, are placing new requirements upon us in terms of our actual strategy. As such, we're proposing to extend the existing strategy for an additional year to allow us time to give this the necessary focus to develop a new strategy to use from 2025. What I didn't want to do was put lots of effort in to a review now, only to find that we've got to then make significant changes again because of these new requirements. So it felt like a much more sensible thing to do would just be to extend the strategy for a short period to give us the time and headroom to make more appropriate changes. But I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, James. Just a couple of questions, really. In the Charter, it mentions that basically counter fraud and audit reports to you. Oh, well, not that on the one yet, is it? The strategy. Am I in the strategy or the Charter? Right. Sorry. No, I'll hold that for later then.
I'll come back to you, Councillor. Yeah. Have we any other questions? Councillor Estro and Councillor Galvin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, very detailed. I just wanted to ask about staff recruitment and retention. On page 174, it says that we're investing in new initiative for better opportunity and training. Has this given any effect in better recruitment and more retaining of staff?
Yeah, what we've been working on is we were part of the pilot phase for the review of pay and progression that's happening across the whole organisation. So what we've developed over the course of the last 9 to 12 months is career progression frameworks. So there's a much clearer, the expectations on staff are much clearer, the competencies that they have to fulfil to move within their range, and obviously as part of their career development are much clearer. There's always been potential for training. We have, since the shared service commenced, had the ambitions of really upskilling staff with training and things like that. There are apprenticeships available as well now. But what we've done is obviously by putting those career progression frameworks in place, any potential new members of staff, when we're advertising, they can again clearly see what's expected of the job, where their career path may go. Obviously, there's potentially only a limited number of posts with us in particular levels, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to stay with us as their career develops. But what we should have is, with this framework, it also gives us better succession planning and things like that. So if people in more senior positions, for example, were to leave, we've potentially got the staff who have been working and may want to take that next step. They know exactly what they need to do to be able to move into that next step. So things are a lot clearer. The impact of that, don't know yet, unfortunately, and touch wood, it stays this way for a while. I've not had to do any recruitment since we brought it in, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Councillor Galvin, thank you.
Thank you, James. It's very good to see on page 173, from 389 investigations between 1st of April and 30th of November. Of course, savings of approximately 824,000. I mean, that is a really good. And just to comment again on the effective staff and the use of the training, I'm pleased to see you're maxing on the use of the apprenticeship route, because a lot of companies don't get any benefit from the apprenticeship levy they pay. I'm pleased to say this council seems to do very well and maximising the use of the apprenticeship levy, and it's great to see it down, this level, and using it to train up some, people who are going to be a benefit for years to come. So well done on that. It's very good to see. Thank you.
Any other questions? May I call on the Vice Chair then, please?
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 165 that the committee note the progress made against the objectives set out in the Internal Audit and Counter Fraud Strategy 2020 to 24. The committee approved the extension of the existing 2020 to 24 strategy to cover the period 2024 to 25.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Now we move on to item 10, which is the Internal Audit Charter 24-25. And I'd ask James to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as detailed in the covering report, following a review of the Charter, we have made no substantive changes with the exception of adding an updated structure chart. As I mentioned under the strategy item and in the covering report, paragraph 4.4, there are the new global internal audit standards. They were released yesterday and we're expected to aim for compliance by January next year when they go formally live. That's going to mean we know, I've not read through the entire document yet, it's a 120-page document that came out yesterday, so we know there are going to be some new requirements for things that need to go into the Charter, so there are likely to be some changes next year. But at the moment, the Charter itself that we have is fit for purpose, so we propose to keep it going for next year. But I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Hackwell, now is your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. One of the things in the Charter on page 186, I think, or no, on page, sorry, yeah, 186, it talks about the head of audit and capital report functionally to the audit committees and reporting their name. In our executive model, should there not be that you report to a portfolio holder as well, or something like that, and rather than just an audit committee? I know sort of functionally they report to you, but there is some, as far as I'm aware, everybody in the council does report through a portfolio holder at some point. There's no mention of that in the Charter. That's just an observation rather than anything else. And where you sort of limit the people's or your auditors' involvement for a year, for example, if they've done any consultancy work, etc. I know that over the last year you've been asked to be involved with your expertise into some sort of like personnel type affairs and look into those sort of as your team to help in the investigations with other issues. Should it not be included in there if a certain auditor has been in-depth investigation into a certain area or a certain function, that they should also be excluded from working in that function for X period of time just to protect themselves? I think just a couple of observations for comment.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what that structure chart refers to, what the document refers to, and what's outlined in the structure chart, it's about the functional and administrative reporting from an independence perspective. So yes, functionally I report to Phil, and I do indeed answer to a portfolio holder. What the Charter is trying to outline is our purpose, authority, remit, and our independence, basically. So what that's referring to, although the portfolio holder isn't mentioned, that still happens as part of the functional report, the administrative reporting. But functionally, I've got, for my independence, I've got a direct reporting line to the chair and to the chief exec, so that essentially the work that we do and the opinion that I deliver at end of year is not influenced by any other officers within the organisation. Does that make sense? Yeah. In terms of the involvement, the auditors do not undertake any investigations. That's dealt with purely by the investigators, which is obviously the two teams are now separate. So yes, we do try and limit any involvement. If they've done a particular review before or they've done some consultancy work in that area, we will try and avoid the same auditor doing it again. We'll also look at any issues that might compromise their independence in any way, and then address those so that they're not doing work in that area. So in terms of the in-depth investigations that you're talking about, that's not undertaken by any of the auditors. That's our counter-fraud staff that deal with actual investigations.
All right.
Any other questions for James? May I call on the Vice Chair then, please?
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 179, that the committee is requested to approve the charter as set out as Appendix 1 to the report.
Is that agreed? Agreed. The meeting is closed, and I thank you all for your attendance tonight. Thank you.